Hello! In this video we are going to focus on information questions as we read a riddle, as we try to solve it. To begin then, let me ask you this question. Do you know what a riddle is? And if you do you know any? Right? Think about the answer. Well, in case you don't know, I will tell you what a riddle is. Read the following riddle. A riddle is a question or statement designed to exercise one's ingenuity in answering it or discovering its meaning. So the answer is hidden and it requires a lot of thinking on our part. All right, let's read this riddle. Two brothers compete for their father's inheritance since he passed recently. Means the father died recently and the two brothers compete for the father's inheritance. Their father had asked that the owner of the slowest horse would have his fortune. The two sons ran on their horses and tried to make them go as slow as possible, but since it didn't work, they went to a wise man for help. When they ran again, they both went at full speed. What did the wise man tell them? All right. You have to think about the answer. If you like, you can pause the video and get the answer. But if not, I'm going to give you the answer later in this video. All right. For now, let's continue and let's use this for our English. All right. Let's use this to learn English. First of all, let me ask you something very simple. Who would inherit the father's fortune? The son with the slowest horse. Yes. And how did they run the second time? They ran at full speed. That is what is intriguing. Why did they run fast the second time? What did the wise man tell them? We don't know yet, but we'll get there. All right. With this text, with this riddle, I would like to focus on information questions. You know about information questions, and you know what, where, when, where do you go, etc. Those are information questions. But I would like to ask you to focus on very specific information. And for that, I'm going to give you an example about all the questions that can be asked from one simple sentence. All right? Look, this sentence. Two brothers compete for their father's inheritance since he passed recently. And from this simple statement, we can ask many information questions. For example, we can ask, how many brothers or how many men were there? The answer is 2. All right. About the word brothers, for example, we could ask, what was the relationship between the two men? They were brothers. About compete, we can ask, what do the two brothers do? They compete. We could ask also, what did their father leave? Leave an inheritance. Whose inheritance was it? It was the father's inheritance. You see? What happened to the father? When did he pass? Recently. So as you can see, there are many questions that we can ask about very specific details in the question. In the questions, we usually have one word that is an information word, like what, whose, when, etc. And after that word, sometimes there are some words that compose a phrase that makes up the information phrase. For example, how many brothers? All right. Now, after that, usually we have an auxiliary. The auxiliary would be right after that phrase or word. For example, how many brothers were? Well, what was the relationship? What do or did, etc. Those are the auxiliaries. And after that, we have the subject of the sentence. For example, what did their father? All right. whose inheritance was it. So that is the subject of the sentence. And after that, if there is a need for another verb, the verb would go there. For example, what did their father leave? All right, that would be the main verb of the sentence. All right. But look that there are some questions that seem not to have an auxiliary. You see, for example, look at this sentence. What happened to the father? We don't see an auxiliary there. Why? Because we are asking about the subject of the sentence. If we're asking about the subject of the sentence, we don't need an auxiliary. All right? That's what we need. Why not? Because after the auxiliary usually comes the subject. If we don't know what the subject is, there is no way of us knowing what auxiliary we should be using. Let's say that is one explanation of that. But for example, what happened to the father, we don't need to say what happened. What did happen to the father? No, we don't need that. When we're asking about the subject, we don't need an auxiliary. Some other information words, apart from these, are, let me show them all to you. What, which, where, when, who, whom, when we need to say to whom or with whom, whose, when we're asking belonging, for example, whose father was it? Who was the father of them? Whose father was he? How many, how much, how often, at what time, in which moment, for example, all those are information phrases. All right. Using those information words and phrases, I would like you to complete an exercise. This is the instruction. Write 5 information questions about specific details in the sentence. Their father had asked that the owner of the slowest horse would have his fortune. All right, that is one sentence. Pick different details and ask information questions about those details. All right, so you have a moment for you to complete your 5 questions about that sentence. Go ahead, pause my video and complete the activity, please. All right, thank you very much for having completed the activity, and I hope that you have your 5 questions. These are some sample answers, all right, sample questions in this case. Let's look at the answers. Number 1, who had asked that the owner of the slowest horse would have his fortune? The father, right? The questions, the sentences had asked that the owner of the slowest horse. So we can say this second question. What had the father asked? That the owner of the slowest horse would have his fortune. Who would have the father's fortune? The owner, yes, of the slowest horse. Or we could ask, the owner of which horse would have the father's fortune? The owner of the slowest horse. And the last question, what would the owner of the slowest horse have? His father's fortune. As you can see, there are many questions we can ask. I don't know if we could ask more questions about this, but this is good enough. It's 5 questions. And I hope that you had similar questions as these. And for now, I am going to pause my video so that we can practice your pronunciation. So listen and practice your pronunciation after the native speaker. Go ahead, please.
Their father had asked that the owner of the slowest horse would have his fortune. Who had asked that the owner of the slowest horse would have his fortune? What had the father asked? Who would have the father's fortune? The owner of which horse would have the father's fortune? What would the owner of the slowest horse have?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for pronouncing that. And now it's time for me to tell you the answer of the riddle. The answer is, the wise man told them to switch horses. If they switch horses, they are all running with a horse that belongs to them in some way. Whoever wins doesn't matter, because if my brother's horse runs, it's gonna be my horse. And if the horse that I am riding wins, then it's gonna be my horse as well. So I will get my father's inheritance anyway. All right, that was the answer. So I thank you very much for having pronounced the riddle, for having thought about it, and especially for remembering that there are several phrases and information words that we can use to ask questions about specific details in a sentence. All right, thank you very much again, and I will see you in the next video.